I still remember the sterile glow of those hospital corridor lights. March 15th, 2003, the night that changed everything. My wife Catherine was behind closed doors, screaming through 18 hours of labor, while I knelt on cold tiles praying to God for both of them. The doctors rushed past me with grim faces, and I knew something was wrong. Then I heard it, my newborn son's first cry piercing the air, just as the heart monitor flatlined for my wife. The silence that followed was deafening. A nurse placed him in my trembling arms while another covered Catherine's face with a white sheet. I held this tiny, perfect boy, torn between the purest joy and deepest grief a man can feel. Through my tears, I made a promise that would define the next 18 years of my life. I swore I'd be both father and mother to him. I'd give him everything I had, everything I was, everything I could possibly become. His name would be Alex, after Catherine's father, and he would never feel the absence of a mother if I could help it. I had no idea how heavy that promise would become, or how much it would cost me in the end. Those early years nearly broke me in half. Alex was barely walking when I took on my second job, construction during the day, security guard at night. Some weeks I worked 3 jobs, catching sleep in my truck between shifts. My body aged fast, joints aching like an old man's, but my son never knew hunger. I learned to swallow my own pain because children don't need to see their father crumble. When Alex cried at night, I sang him the lullabies Catherine used to hum. When he scraped his knee, I kissed it better and told him stories until he forgot the hurt. I decided he would grow up feeling safe and loved, no matter what it cost me. The house stayed warm, his belly stayed full, and his clothes stayed clean. To him, this was normal life. He didn't know I was dying inside from exhaustion, or that I cried in the shower when I thought about Catherine. He just knew his dad was always there, always strong, always ready with a hug or a bedtime story. But the truth is, he never saw the cracks forming in me either. I hid them too well. Winters were the hardest months of my life. I walked 3 miles to work in shoes with holes, my socks soaked through by December slush. But every dollar I saved went to Alex's textbooks and school supplies, not to new boots for me. I remember skipping dinner just to watch him eat a hot meal, telling him I wasn't hungry when my stomach growled loud enough to wake the neighbors. He thought our life was normal, lights always on, food always on the table, heat always running. He never knew I kept the electricity on by pawning my wedding ring. That gold band Catherine slipped on my finger during our wedding dance disappeared into a pawn shop for $43.60. Just enough to keep us going another month. The worst part wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was watching other kids get picked up by both parents while Alex only had me. But I made sure he never felt like he was missing anything. At school events, I clapped loud enough for 2 people. At bedtime, I read stories in different voices, one for mommy characters, one for daddy characters. And I never told him about the ring, until it was too late. Years passed like pages in a book I was too tired to read. I stayed in the background at every school event, every game, every performance. I stood in the back rows, clapping until my hands hurt while Alex shined on stage like the star I always knew he was. Parent-teacher conferences, science fairs, spelling bees, I was there for all of it. Sometimes I caught other parents staring at me with pity in their eyes. The single dad with paint under his fingernails and concrete dust in his hair. But their opinions didn't matter. Only Alex mattered. I wanted nothing more than for him to feel confident and secure. When he won the spelling bee in 5th grade, I was the loudest voice cheering his name. When he made varsity soccer as a sophomore, I worked double shifts to afford his cleats and equipment. Love, I thought, doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. It works quietly in the shadows, making sure everything runs smoothly. I believe that if I did my job right, Alex would grow up knowing he was cherished. He'd understand that every opportunity he had came from sacrifice made with joy, not obligation. But maybe I stayed silent for too long. June 3rd, 2021, graduation day. 18 years of sacrifice led to this moment. My son stood tall in his cap and gown, diploma in hand, ready to conquer the world. I sat in that auditorium wearing my best shirt, the only decent one I owned, watching him prepare to address the crowd as valedictorian. My chest swelled with pride, so fierce it hurt to breathe. This brilliant, confident young man was my life's work. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every aching joint, it all led to this. For once, I thought I'd be seen. Maybe he'd mention my name, acknowledge the years I gave him, tell the world about the father who worked 3 jobs to make this moment possible. The principal introduced him as a remarkable young man who overcame significant challenges. I straightened in my seat, anticipating the speech where Alex would finally give me the recognition I'd never asked for but secretly craved. After 18 years of invisible sacrifice, maybe it was time for the world to know what love looked like. I should have known better. Pride comes before the fall, and I was about to fall harder than I ever imagined possible. Instead, I heard the words that broke me completely. Alex stepped up to the podium with that confident smile I'd watched develop over the years. He looked out at the crowd, teachers, families, friends, and began to speak. His voice was strong and clear, every word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "I want to talk about perseverance," he said, and my heart began to race with anticipation. About what it means to overcome obstacles and succeed against the odds. You see, I raised myself. The words hit me like a physical blow. I blinked hard, certain I'd misheard. But he continued, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. "I had no real support system, no one guiding my path. Everything I've accomplished, I did alone. I'm self-made, the product of my own grit and determination. When life knocked me down, I picked myself up. When challenges arose, I faced them head-on. I am living proof that you don't need anyone else to succeed. You just need to believe in yourself." The crowd erupted in applause. Parents beamed with admiration. Teachers nodded approvingly. Every cheer felt like a stone hurled directly at my chest. My palms went numb, my vision blurred, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My son had just erased me from his story, in front of everyone who mattered. I sat frozen in that plastic auditorium chair while the world celebrated my son's independence. My hands trembled in my lap. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but I couldn't stand, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but absorb the crushing weight of his betrayal. 18 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion had been reduced to nothing. In Alex's version of his life story, I simply didn't exist. The father who worked 3 jobs? Gone. The man who walked miles in shoes with holes? Irrelevant. The parent who gave up everything so his son could have anything? Completely invisible. People around me clapped and cheered while I drowned in humiliation deeper than any ocean. A woman in the row ahead turned to her husband and whispered, "What an inspiring young man. Imagine raising yourself at such a young age." If only she knew the truth. My sacrifices had become invisible in a single 10-minute speech. The wedding ring I pawned, the dinners I skipped, the dreams I abandoned, none of it mattered to him. I was nothing more than background noise in the symphony of his success. I left that graduation hall a ghost of the man who had walked in with such hope and pride. That night, I sat in our kitchen waiting for Alex to come home from his graduation party. The house felt different somehow, smaller, emptier, like the air itself had been poisoned by his words. When he finally walked through the front door at midnight, he was still glowing from all the praise and attention. "Dad," he called out cheerfully, "did you hear my speech?" Everyone loved it. Coach Martinez said it was the best graduation address he'd heard in 30 years. I looked at this young man I'd raised, this stranger who just publicly denied my existence, and something cold settled in my chest. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "Alex, sit down. We need to talk." He plopped into the chair across from me, still buzzing with excitement. I studied his face, Catherine's eyes, my stubborn jaw, a combination of both our dreams made flesh. Then I spoke the words that would change both our lives forever. "If you truly believe you raised yourself, then you should continue doing so. Alone." His smile faded. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're no longer welcome under my roof or my support." Alex's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, then anger. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising. "This is my home too." "No," I replied, my voice steady as stone. "This is the home I provided for a son who apparently didn't need providing for. If you raised yourself, you don't need me anymore." He laughed, but it sounded forced, nervous. "Dad, come on. You're overreacting. It was just a speech." Just a speech. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "You stood in front of hundreds of people and claimed you had no support, no guidance, no father worth mentioning. You called yourself self-made. So go make yourself a life somewhere else." His pride wouldn't let him back down, wouldn't let him admit he'd been cruel. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and lifted his chin, the same stubborn gesture I'd seen Catherine make 1,000 times. "Fine," he said coldly. "I'll pack my things." I watched him storm upstairs, listened to drawers slamming and hangers rattling. An hour later, he carried the last of his belongings to his beat-up Honda Civic. His chin remained high, his words dripped with arrogance. "I'll be fine without you." Better than fine. The silence that followed his departure was unbearable. For the first few weeks, Alex seemed to prove his point. His social media exploded with photos, nights out with friends, parties at the lake, big smiles everywhere. To anyone watching his Instagram story, he was living his best life as a free, independent adult. But I knew better than social media lies. Bills don't disappear because you post happy pictures. Rent doesn't wait because you're having fun with friends. And pride can't fill an empty stomach or keep the lights on. I found myself checking his posts obsessively, looking for cracks in his perfect facade. There were subtle signs if you knew how to look. The same shirt appearing in multiple photos, cheaper restaurants replacing the fancy ones, fewer updates as the weeks went on. He was couch surfing with friends, picking up odd jobs, trying to make it work through sheer stubbornness. Part of me wanted to call him, to ask if he needed help. But a larger part of me, the part still stinging from his public humiliation, stayed silent. If he wanted to be self-made, he could learn what that actually meant. I started hearing whispers from neighbors about his struggles. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street mentioned seeing Alex at the food bank on Tuesday mornings. "Poor boy looks so thin," she said, shaking her head sadly. "You two having some kind of fight?" Each piece of news about his struggles stabbed me in the chest. My son, the boy I'd protected from every hardship, was learning about hunger firsthand. He was too proud and too ashamed to call me, but not too proud to stand in line for free groceries. Tommy Chin from the corner store told me Alex had been asking about part-time work, anything that paid cash. "Kid looks desperate," Tommy said. "You sure everything's okay at home?" I wanted to scream that everything was wrong, that my son was starving while I sat at a table full of food I couldn't taste. But I also couldn't interfere. Alex had made his choice when he denied me in front of everyone. He'd chosen his pride over our family, his image over the truth. Still, every rumor about his struggles felt like glass in my veins. This was my child suffering, even if he'd forgotten I was his father. Then came the news about the girl, and everything changed. Alex had been pursuing Isabella Martinez for months during senior year. He'd talk about her like she was made of starlight, her laugh, her smile, the way she made everything brighter just by existing in the same room. I'd watched him practice asking her to prom in our hallway mirror, adjusting his tie dozens of times. But Isabella came from money. Her father owned 3 car dealerships. Her mother was a successful real estate agent. They lived in the kind of house where Alex's background wouldn't matter. At least, that's what I'd hoped. According to neighborhood gossip, Isabella discovered Alex at Murphy's Diner on Elm Street. Not as a customer, but as an employee. Mop in hand, apron stained with grease, cleaning tables for minimum wage while wearing the confident smile that had once charmed her at graduation parties. She looked at him with an expression he'd never seen before, not admiration or attraction, but pity. Pure, undiluted pity for the boy who'd fallen so far from the pedestal she'd placed him on. That single look destroyed everything Alex had built for himself. His image of success, his reputation among peers, his romantic dreams. All of it crumbled in the time it took Isabella to recognize him and look away in embarrassment. That was the day my proud son finally cracked. 3 months after graduation, on a rainy Thursday night in September, I heard a knock at my front door. Not the confident pounding of someone who belonged there, but the hesitant tapping of someone who'd lost the right to feel at home. I opened the door to find Alex standing on my porch, soaked to the bone. He was thinner than I'd ever seen him, his cheekbones sharp against pale skin. His clothes were wrinkled and worn, his shoes held together with duct tape. But it was his eyes that broke my heart. Hollow, defeated, stripped of all the arrogance that had carried him through graduation day. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood there in the rain, looking at me like he was seeing a ghost. Then, slowly, his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto my porch. "Father," he whispered, his voice cracking on the word. "Please." He clutched at my legs like a drowning man grabs a life preserver, his whole body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for months. Tears mixed with rainwater on his face as 18 years of pride finally shattered into pieces. "I was blind," he gasped between sobs. "I was so arrogant. Please forgive me. I thought I could do everything alone, but you were my foundation all along." I stood there for a long moment, looking down at my son, this broken young man who'd once been so full of himself that he denied my very existence. Part of me wanted to pull him inside immediately, to wrap him in warm blankets and feed him until he looked healthy again. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 months nursing wounded pride and sleepless nights, wasn't ready to let him off the hook so easily. "Get up, Alex," I said quietly. "Come inside before you catch pneumonia." He struggled to his feet, still crying, still shaking. In the harsh porch light, I could see just how much weight he'd lost, how the confident boy I'd raised had become this hollow-eyed stranger. My heart ached for him, but my resolve remained firm. I led him to the kitchen and made him sit at our old table while I put the kettle on for tea. The silence between us was heavy with 3 months of hurt and stubbornness on both sides. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I know what I said was wrong. I know what I did was cruel. But I didn't understand." "I didn't know?" "Didn't know what?" I asked, setting a steaming mug in front of him. "I didn't know what it felt like to be truly alone." Alex wrapped his hands around the warm mug like it was the most precious thing in the world. His fingers were rough and calloused, new evidence of the manual labor he'd been doing to survive. For months, I'd wondered what humility would look like on him. Now I knew. "I lost everything," he continued, staring into his tea. "The apartment, the friends, the girl I thought I loved. Everything I thought made me special was just gone, and I realized none of it was really mine to begin with." I sat across from him, studying this changed version of my son. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and real. But I wasn't ready to make this easy for him. "You said you raised yourself," I reminded him. "You told 300 people that I didn't exist in your story." His face crumpled. "I know. I was trying to sound impressive, trying to be this self-made success story everyone would admire. I thought acknowledging help made me look weak. And now I know that denying you was the weakest thing I've ever done." He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "You sacrificed everything for me, and I threw it back in your face for applause from strangers." I felt my own eyes beginning to burn, but I wasn't done teaching this lesson yet. "I'm glad you're home," I said, and I meant it. But coming home doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't fix the damage done. Alex nodded miserably. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what you gave up for me." The next morning brought a test I'd been preparing for weeks. The mail arrived with Alex's college acceptance letter from State University, along with something else, the tuition bill for his first semester. $23,000 due by October 15th. For 4 years, I'd been quietly setting aside money for his college education. Working overtime, skipping vacations, driving my truck until it barely ran. Also, Alex could start his adult life without the burden of student loans. But that was when I thought I had a grateful son. Now I had something else entirely. I slid the envelope across our kitchen table to where Alex sat eating the breakfast I'd made him. His face went white as he read the amount due. "Dad," his voice was small, uncertain. "If you raised yourself," I said calmly, "then you can pay for yourself too." His hands trembled as he set the bill down. "You're not going to help with college?" "No." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in reality. Alex scrambled for work like a man possessed, janitorial shifts at the hospital, waiting tables at chain restaurants, anything that paid cash and didn't require extensive experience. His hands, which had never done real work before graduation, quickly became covered in blisters and cuts. I watched him leave the house at dawn and return after midnight, exhausted and discouraged. His back ached from mopping floors, his feet hurt from standing for hours, and his pride took a beating with every "we'll call you" that never turned into an actual call. Each payday brought the harsh mathematics of survival into focus. After rent for a tiny studio apartment, food, and basic necessities, Alex was lucky to save $50. At that rate, he'd need 40 years to afford 1 semester of college. His friends from high school were posting photos from their college dorm rooms, fraternity parties, and campus events. Meanwhile, Alex was learning what a W-2 form was and why health insurance costs so much. I wanted to help him. Every paternal instinct I had screamed at me to write the check and end his suffering. But this wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about education. The most important lesson I could ever teach him. The tuition deadline was getting closer, and Alex was nowhere near ready to meet it. Desperate and running out of time, Alex tried applying for student loans. He spent hours online filling out forms, gathering documents, calling financial aid offices. I watched him discover words like credit history, cosigner, and debt-to-income ratio. Each rejection email hit him like a physical blow. No credit established. No employment history to speak of. No family member willing to guarantee his loans. He came to me one evening, laptop in hand, looking defeated. "Dad, would you consider co-signing? I know things are complicated between us, but I promise I'll pay everything back myself." I looked at this young man who'd spent months learning hard lessons about pride and independence. He was asking, not demanding. Humble, not entitled. But the lesson wasn't complete yet. "Alex," I said gently, "you told everyone that you raised yourself. You convinced them that you succeeded without help from anyone, especially me. How would it look if your father had to rescue you now?" His silence was heavier than any scream could have been. I could see him working through the logic, understanding the trap his own words had built around him. "So what do I do?" he whispered. "You figure it out. The way self-made people do." October came with cruel efficiency. Alex's college dreams slipped further away with each passing day while his former classmates settled into campus life. The tuition deadline arrived and went, taking his enrollment status with it. I found him sitting on our front porch one evening, staring at his laptop screen. The university's student portal showed his status: withdrawn, non-payment. 4 years of academic achievement reduced to 2 words and a hyphen. "I can't do this anymore," he said without looking up at me. His voice was barely audible, stripped of every ounce of pretense. "I can't keep pretending I don't need help. I can't keep acting like I'm strong enough to handle this alone." I sat down beside him on the porch steps, close enough to hear him breathing, but far enough away to let him finish. "I've been lying to myself for months," he continued. "Even after I came home, even after I apologized, part of me still thought I could prove myself. Still thought I could make it work through sheer willpower." He closed the laptop and finally looked at me. "But I can't. I'm not self-made. I never was. Everything I had, everything I was, came from you." And I threw it all away for 10 minutes of applause from strangers. For the first time since graduation day, my son was telling me the complete truth. "I need you," Alex said, and those 3 words carried more weight than his entire graduation speech. "Not just your money, though I need that too. I need your guidance, your wisdom, your partnership. I need my father." I felt 18 years of pain and frustration begin to crack open in my chest. This was the conversation I'd been waiting for. Not an apology driven by desperation, but genuine understanding of what family meant. "If I help you," I said carefully, "it won't be charity. It won't be me rescuing you while you go back to taking me for granted. It has to be different this time." Alex nodded eagerly. "Anything. I'll do anything to make this right. We'll be partners in your education. I'll pay half your tuition, you'll pay half. I'll co-sign your loans, you'll work to pay them back. You'll live here while you study, but you'll contribute to household expenses. And most importantly," I paused, making sure he was really listening, "you'll never again pretend that you accomplished anything without help. You'll acknowledge the people who support you, starting with me." Alex's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. Yes to everything. I promise." We shook hands like business partners, like men who respected each other, like father and son starting over from scratch. Spring semester began in January with Alex enrolled at State University and working 20 hours a week at Murphy's Diner, the same place where Isabella had seen him at his lowest point. But this time, he wore his work uniform with dignity instead of shame. He came home exhausted every night, his textbooks heavy in his backpack, his hands still rough from washing dishes and clearing tables. But something was different now. Instead of collapsing in front of the TV, he sat with me at our kitchen table, telling me about his classes, his professors, his dreams for the future. For the first time in years, we had real conversations. Not just the surface-level check-ins we'd fallen into during his high school years, but deep talks about life, responsibility, and what it meant to be a man worth respecting. He told me stories I'd never heard before, how scared he'd been after his mother died, how he'd sometimes felt like he was competing with her memory for my attention, how he'd built up walls of independence because he was afraid of needing anyone too much. I told him stories too, about the nights I'd cried myself to sleep after Catherine died, about the times I'd wanted to give up but kept going because he needed me, about how proud I'd been of him long before I'd ever needed him to say so publicly. Word spread through our neighborhood about Alex's transformation. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned seeing him helping elderly customers carry their groceries at the market. Tommy Chun told me Alex had started volunteering to tutor kids in math on weekends, refusing payment because education should be free for anyone willing to work for it. The boy who'd once boasted about being self-made was now going out of his way to acknowledge every form of help he received. When his professor complimented his essay, Alex made sure to mention the father who'd taught him to read. When his supervisor praised his work ethic, Alex talked about the man who'd shown him what real dedication looked like. His social media presence changed completely. Instead of party photos and humble brags, he posted pictures of us working in the garden together, screenshots of his improving grades with captions thanking his support system, thoughtful articles about the importance of family and community. His friends from high school barely recognized this version of Alex. The arrogant boy who'd claimed complete independence was gone, replaced by someone who understood that strength came from connection, not isolation. But the biggest change was in how he introduced himself to new people. I'm Alex. My father is the reason I'm standing here today. Near the end of his first semester back, Alex had to give a presentation for his sociology class about overcoming personal challenges. I didn't know about it until he asked me to attend as his guest. Are you sure? I asked. Last time I went to hear you speak publicly. He winced at the memory. That's exactly why I need you there. I have some things to set right. The classroom was small, maybe 30 students and a handful of family members. Alex stood at the front with a confidence I hadn't seen since graduation day, but this confidence felt different, earned rather than assumed. I want to talk about the difference between being self-made and being selfish, he began, looking directly at me. A year ago, I gave a speech claiming I'd raised myself, that I'd succeeded without help from anyone. I was wrong, and more than wrong, I was cruel. The room was silent as Alex told his story. Not the polished version he'd delivered at graduation, but the truth. He talked about his father's sacrifices, the jobs I'd worked, the meals I'd skipped, the dreams I'd postponed so his could come true. I dedicated this presentation to the man who taught me what real strength looks like. Not the strength to stand alone, but the strength to lift others up. My father. After his presentation, Alex and I drove home in comfortable silence. The weight of the past year, the anger, the pride, the lessons learned the hard way, seemed to lift from both our shoulders like fog burning off in morning sunlight. At home, Alex did something he'd never done before. He pulled out his wallet and placed money on our kitchen table, his contribution to that month's groceries. Not much, but enough to matter. Enough to show he understood we were partners now, not benefactor and dependent. We cooked dinner together, really together, with Alex handling half the work instead of just setting the table or washing dishes afterward. We talked about his upcoming finals, my plans to fix the back porch, normal father and son things that had somehow become extraordinary through their absence. As we sat down to eat, Alex looked across the table at me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was small. Not the guarded politeness of his teenage years or the desperate gratitude of his return home, but simple, uncomplicated love. Dad, he said, I know I have a lot more to make up for, and I know trust takes time to rebuild, but I want you to know how grateful I am. Not just for the help with school, but for not giving up on me when I gave up on you. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're my son, Alex. I never gave up. I was just waiting for you to remember you were mine too. That night, after we'd finished dinner and Alex had gone upstairs to study, he appeared in my bedroom doorway. I was reading, enjoying the simple pleasure of having my son safe under our roof again. Dad, his voice carried the same uncertainty I'd heard the night he'd collapsed on our porch. Can I ask you something? Of course. He stepped into the room, looking younger than his 19 years. After everything I said, everything I did to hurt you, am I still your son? Really and truly. The question hit me harder than his graduation speech ever had. I set down my book and really looked at him. This young man who'd had to lose everything to understand what he'd always had. "Alex," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "you were always my son. From the moment I held you in that hospital room, through every mistake and every triumph, through your worst moment and your best day, you were always mine." Tears started flowing down his face, the same way they had that rainy night 3 months ago. But these were different tears. Not the desperate sobs of a broken man, but the relieved weeping of someone who'd finally found his way home. "I just needed you to remember that being my son was something to be proud of, not something to hide." He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me, holding on like he had when he was small and thunder scared him awake. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I'm proud to be your son." In that moment, revenge melted into redemption, and my son finally saw the man who had raised him all along.